Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So I thought I'd do like a really quick list of builds to give you ideas of what you could play in the short leagues that are coming up. Um, so in particular, these like short leagues are a good opportunity to get some SSF practice in, which is always good to learn elements like crafting or anything else that you might sort of not have done in the main league or during league or whatnot as you're trying to like min and max and do crazy stuff and smash Ubers. But so they obviously have the trade league component. I myself am going to be playing SSF, so we're going to look at SSF builds. So for this video, essentially I've jumped onto POE Ninja and had a look at some builds, in particular 5 key builds that you can pretty much get up and going on the smell of an oily rag at the end of the day. And you know, I've tried and true, will get you over the line. And in particular, and I'll talk about my methodology of how I pick these builds out. I look at things like, you know, number of uniques, ease of scaling on the skills, and down to obviously filtered for builds as at the 1 week mark, which is realistic for a 7-day league, and obviously builds that can survive the early turmoil of absolutely face melting levels of damage coming from crazy 10 torment sort of per map areas and crangled and all that sort of jazz. So anyway, let's get into the video and talk about 5 builds that you could potentially play in the PoE Short League for 3.22. Okay, so how do I find builds or get ideas for builds when I'm looking at these sort of like league events and stuff like that? Well, number one, we have some parameters to work towards with this particular thing. So first of all, we know that we're going to get absolutely destroyed by packs on maps. That always happens in these events. So we need to find builds that are tanky. But also on top of that, we need to find builds that were achievable within the first week of league. So I've also added another parameter in here, which is builds that only made it to level 95. You may not play for the whole 7 days. Now, for me, the first day, I can get to pure endgame and smash my way through. And it just depends on how frustrated you get with the amount of crangling or the sentinels and things like that. We don't really know quite how hard it's going to be until we basically get destroyed on day 1, and then your soul is crushed, and then you're like, what the hell? So anyway, we're going to try and find builds that deal with that. And this is how I do it. So I basically went, so we're going to play SSF. So, and this is a video about SSF builds. Okay, so you're going to filter for SSF builds, number 1 on POE Ninja. Now, there are people that have hidden profiles and stuff like that, fully well aware of that. But if you can find a better resource than POE Ninja, I'd like to hear about it, because this is basically our go-to one-stop shop to get ideas at this stage. So, number 2, all right, we look at builds that filter at a level cap of level 95, and that's within the first 7 days. Because if I put level 100, there would inevitably be people here that absolutely skin me alive for putting level 100. So even though the builds I'll feature are level 100, solution around that, drop health, drop damage, all good. Now, beyond that, now we can see all the builds that are available at the first week. So we go to Time Machine, 1 week, we have 7 days. This is where you would expect you would be able to achieve within 7 days. So from that, we can see a large number of builds that sort of, you know, probably not a large number, but a reasonable number of builds that we could play, you know, and or get ideas from. And so this is how I've pulled together some builds to get ideas from. Now, in particular, the builds that I'm going to put down in this list of 5 are builds more gauged towards safer, higher levels of defense, a little more dot, things that you'll actually be able to scale up earlier, much quicker. And I'm not going to go into leveling guides and things like that. I'll let you do the research. This is a little different to how I would do a curation at the start of league, where I do a whole lot of research, whatever. This is sort of shooting off the hip just to go, okay, we've got a couple days. Let's see if we can pick out some builds that might be cool and play around with them. Now, you could go EA, you know, explosive arrow, ballista totems, like that's an option there, and it's definitely there. Now, in particular with SSF, some other elements to remember is that you have to craft the gear yourself. You've got to scale and do things solo. You can't just go into a market and go and buy whatever you want. And on top of that, uniques are not always, you're not always going to get the drops of uniques, and they're going to be a lot more special when you do get the unique that you need. And a couple of these builds have the uniques that, you know, people are going to be like, hey, that's got a unique in it. But this is all done in SSF and all done within 7 days. So it is completely doable. You just got to have a little bit of RNG sometimes. And the alternative is if you can't quite get the unique you need, as long as it's not a build defining unique, then you can craft something that gets close. And or it's a good opportunity to learn how to craft things that get close. And in these short leagues, you also get access to crafting mats that you may not have previously had ease of access to in the main league as well, which is one of the elements of, that makes them fun and why they're sort of escalated versus your main league. Anyway, if you want to go sort of farming and looking for builds that you might like the idea of, then by all means, check out this configuration on POE Ninja and see what you find. There's a lot of really good players in the game, and this is one way that you can get a hell of a lot of ideas of how to build your builds, and or you could study different trees. There's usually like God knows how many ways to play one individual build, like anywhere up to 100 different ways to play it, and you can mix and match elements to accommodate your playstyle. Anyway, let's get into the first build that I'm going to put on this list. Okay, so the first build that I saw that stuck out to me was actually a level 93 Juggernaut in SSF, and this is playing a two-handed Boneshatter setup. Now, there's been a bit of Boneshatter coverage on the channel, mainly for wind-up Boneshatter for Delve, but this is just going to be mapping Boneshatter, so it's a hell of a lot less complicated. And I thought I'd just talk to the POE Ninja screen. I'll pull the POBs down and sanitize them so they are cleaner, they have the right configuration settings and things like that, and you'll see that in the links below in the description. And this one was put together by a player called Massive Duck. Now, these aren't YouTubers, these are just everyday guys playing the game, and they're just really good at it. And this is being during the current league, so 3.22, so it's in the current patch iteration. Now, the reason why I picked this build out, number one, Boneshatter is just tried and true and it works. It scales really well early game. You get access to it relatively early on. And the other thing is you can get access to sufficient crafting mats on axes to be able to craft axes. So jagged fossils, essences are generally pretty viable. Different things like that to be able to craft your axe. And basically you're just going for a high DPS axe. And obviously you're not going to get 6 links straight away, and this is at the end of 7 days, by the way. This is filtered for 1 week in the time machine. And the other elements of this build that make it really strong is, number one, 4500 life pool on Boneshatter is really good. And you'll notice in SSF, they generally tend to have a little bit higher of a life pool as well. The other thing is 61 to 62,000 rounded armor, so it's nice and tanky. Now, you would suspect that they would have all elemental resistances capped out and things like that. Also, everything on the build is relatively straightforward to get access to. So, we're just looking at Helm with maxed cap resistances. Same with the chest. In fact, it's just a 4-link. We've got Amethyst rings that deal with Chaos Res. Belt, which is literally just life, regen, and resistances. Boots, which again is just movement, speed, and resistances. Super easy to get. And then you've got your gloves, which are Tanu Ahi, which are pretty common gloves to run on all Boneshatter builds because of the chance to gain Adrenaline and the chance to gain Onslaught. Now, flasking, pretty straightforward stuff. Pretty much just auto-trigger flask when charges reach full. And then obviously the tree breakdown, which I won't go into any great detail, but pretty standard for Boneshatter. Obviously, you don't really need to worry about stacking crit or anything like that. You're going to use precise technique. And with the ascendancy called Undeniable, you get an absolute ton of accuracy. So you don't even need to worry about accuracy to any great degree either. Just a really easy build, as you can see. Boneshatter Fortify, we're not using Enhance in this build for this particular Boneshatter build because there's no need to. You're literally just scaling Boneshatter's flat damage. It only needs to get to like 10 to 15 stacks, give or take, of trauma, and then basically just tanking up on top of that and just whacking everything that sort of, moves at the end of the day. That's basically it. You drop your Blood Rage, go, hit everything, you get a nice big AoE off the Boneshatter, and then, you'll do things like scale up and, for example, have Tribal Fury, which gives you melee splash and all that sort of jazz. Anyway, first build that I recommend, nice and easy. I'll put a link in the description to this page. I'll also export it in the different formats that you need in order to search it up on PoE, and I'll double check all the POBs and whatnot to make sure that they're clean and that they work. And then, so this is the first build that I recommend for SSF for the upcoming short leagues. Okay, so the next one's pretty obvious, and this one works 10 ways to Sunday. Now, ignore the Legacy of Fury. It's unlikely, though it's not unlikely you wouldn't get that in 7 days. If you hit mapping and you're really keen on this, you can get to mapping by day 2 and have Legacy of Furies. And God forbid there will absolutely be people that do that. But in SSF, you know, you're literally just chancing this and killing Exarch at the end of the day. You don't need to take Uber Exarchs, whatever. You might get really lucky, and then this is going to give you huge screen explodability. But this is just Fire Trap and Righteous Fire. Nothing crazy. And so if you followed a Pox build, and by all means, Pox's builds will work in this short league as well. They scale up really well. One of the big advantages of playing the Jugg #1 in a league like this is just a straight up tank ability, especially in taking the ascendancy called Untiring. Get a ton of life regeneration, which is just unparalleled. The other thing that you get an advantage of is you can scale up, once you do get Untiring, you can scale up RF like as soon as you get Untiring, which is by Act 3. To Act 4, you would expect to do the first ascendancy, so then you're going to get Untiring, scale it up, Righteous Fire from that point onwards, run Purity of Fire, Bob's your uncle, done. You're basically just cheesing your way through the game. There's also no crazy cluster jewels. You're probably not going to get Glorious Vanity, though you may in the first 7 days, and this guy did. That being said, this configuration works really well. So no +2 wand. There is a multi-craft, which you could get within 7 days. This gentleman did. But you're only looking at +1 fire spell damage. There is a fair bit of spell damage on here, but it doesn't really matter too much. You can sort of move and shake with that. So you may not get quite to where this one gets to, but that's not unachievable within the first day of league, as in short league. Now the helm, literally, you could just hit this with essences and you're good to go. The other thing is you could also alteration craft it and or chaos orb craft it if you're collecting chaos and going down to delve and SSF. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. Because you're playing SSF, you don't need chaos to buy stuff with. You can actually use it to craft with, which is one of the advantages. This is not an unachievable helm. This is pretty doable. Elder helms drop frequently once you get to endgame and you run Elder influence on maps. It's completely possible to get this type of helm. Same with the, pardon me, same with the Spirit Shield. These generally drop in Delve, grants level 20 aspect of the Spider. This is a synthesized shield, but you could, looks like it's synthesized, but you could go down into Delve and craft these out of Delve or farm these out of Delve. With RF, at this type of RF build, you can make it down to about 300 to 400 depth in Delve, no problems whatsoever, and then go for animalistic nodes in Delve and literally get that no issues. You may not be able to get the +3 on the shield, but again, this is SSF league that this is taken from, so this gentleman did in fact do that, and it was completely possible to do. Same with the chest piece. This is all craftable, and or you don't need to have a chest piece that looks exactly like this. You could get something close with some life regeneration, things like that to compensate, but again, completely doable. And this is part of the element of learning SSF, is learning how to craft these elements as well, which is why it's a good practice league for when you get into the main league, which can allow you to learn how to craft better in the leagues as well. Same with the amulet, nothing crazy here. Literally the biggest, pardon me, the biggest thing here is charisma. And that would be this player probably played some blights and got some gold oils and opalescence, which he really lucked out. But again, that's half the fun with SSF is RNG. And then gloves, nothing crazy on the gloves. The exposure you can craft on really easily. Dexterity, just had a fracture of that from Delve. So, you know, nice and easy. Or from just mapping, in fact. Pardon me. Belt. Percentage maximum life literally is just an influence roll. He could have been doing Conquerors and got an influence roll with that. That's not impossible to do. And again, Legacy of Fury just drops off Exarch. It's a random drop that you get off it. And everything else is relatively achievable. Taste of Hate may not drop straight away for you. That's something that, you know, you're just going to have to get lucky on. But it's not impossible to get either early in the league. And as you can see, the initial damage calcs, which do spit out on POE.ninja, which are a bit misleading from time to time, but not too far off the mark here. It's believable that these would be at this level. You can clearly see that they're quite good, so yeah. And a respectable amount of armor and a respectable amount of life. So there's nothing wrong with this build. It would work in a short league, and that's why I'm putting it as number 2 on the list. Number 3 is one that I've done builds on like multiple times. Even this league, I did my Vortex Ignite Elementalist because I really just like, I think it's a way better build than RF at the end of the day. Cold Dot is just really efficient at shutting down enemies, and also putting things like hypothermia and whatnot against enemies just wrecks them and cuts down movement speed, makes it easier to kite and juke and whatever. So this is Creeping Frost Vortex, and was done by a player called Ms. Element, whatever that means. Anyway, so it's a life-based build, so unlike mine that uses Chaos Inoculation, this is life and then stacks Hybrid Armor and Evasion. It's actually really good defensive strategy stacking both. And then basically you can take elements of both in your boots, armor, and evasion. Same with chest, and you can get a lot more defensiveness out of your build because you both dodge and you deflect, or not deflect, but you can mitigate physical damage at the same time, which is really effective. This one's actually really interesting because it uses Bisco's leash as well, which means you get rampage, which means you can explode more enemies on the screen and run through maps, and you get a lot more quad. And the other thing is you got a higher probability because of getting better drops in SSF because 1% increased rarity of items found per 15 rage. So, and you get 5% increased quant, which is really effective. May not seem like a lot, but it's really effective. Now, if you can get this roll, best case scenario. If you don't get this roll, don't freak out. You can put any other belt on this build, stack its defenses up, and just make it stronger. So that's not an unrealistic outcome for this build. Same with Amulet, +1 to all spells. In this case, you just need +1 to Cold. Not Amulet, sorry, Crystal Scepter. So +1 to Cold with Cold Dot, which is craftable as you level up through the game. Completely achievable, as with gloves. Nothing crazy here. You can get all of these items. Eye of Malice tends to be a pretty commonly dropped item. So yeah, completely doable. And so there's nothing in here that I'd be concerned about of you not being able to achieve. Now, setup-wise, there's no Awakened Jewels or anything like that. Literally just Creeping Frost, Vortex, and a 6-link setup. Alternatively, you could be Creeping Frost in a 4-link setup, either in the boots or something like that, and drop something else until you get a 6-link, or just drop Creeping Frost altogether and use Cold Snap and Vortex at the same time, because then you will also get Frenzy charges from Cold Snap dropping on the ground. And as enemies drop on the ground and die, then you'll be able to get Frenzy charges, and that'll further enhance your damage. This uses Cruelty, Swift Affliction, Hypothermia, and Control Destruction. Big advantage of Vortex early on, scales really well. I think you get it at about level 32. Don't 100% quote me on that, but you generally get to switch over about Act 3, Act 4 to Vortex. And as you level up, you can do like Absolution or something like that, or Magma Orb to level up early on. This character is really easy to level up on the Elementalist once you start stacking ailments and whatnot after your first Ascendancy as well. It just gets easier and easier. And then basically from there you go on to do the tree, which isn't very complicated. Generally, I would start going to the right of the tree initially, and then work my way to the left after that. That's basically how I would play this build. And I would go straight for Shaper of Winter, which is going to give you the highest impact of cold straight away. And this also uses Bastion of Elements, which means it gives you further mitigation of damage. Being an SSF build just makes you a lot more effective. Anyway, this would be the third build that I recommend just because it's a lot of fun. Vortex, I've done league on league in various different formats and fashions. There's tons of information on it. And if you don't like the look of this build, you can look up other ways to play it because there's plenty of other players that play Vortex in SSF leagues, or in this case, short leagues that like, you know, the Krangle events and whatnot that we're looking at. Okay, so another build that works really well is Rain of Arrows. So I put a curation up at the start of this league actually for Fuzzy Duckings, and I'll put a link to his video and his build guide on this too for league start. But Rain of Arrows champion works really well. Super sustainable, super strong, tanky, get about 33,000 armor, give or take. Not so much life, but when you got that much armor, you can afford to not need so much armor because you're doing pretty well. Now, obviously, this is within the first week, so you can also scale this up so you see the latest snapshot as well. And this is the same with all these builds if you think that you can achieve better. But overall, one of the best elements of this build, scales really well, takes down bosses really well early on, and will get you through endgame mapping and everything you need. Probably not as fast as you'd like it to, but it's a sort of middle ground sort of arrow build, and a lot more interesting than playing Toxic Rain. But anyway, so it has a bit of hybridized gear. This one in particular uses Trinity, so it does resonance stacking, and then basically you can do elemental damage with it. Scales a bit of crit, Mirage Archer, all that sort of jazz. So you got arrows flying all over the screen, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, I'll chuck a link to Fuzzy Ducking's video. And there's also, I think, a Deadeye version of this as well that you can play. Yeah, but I'll put a link to his champion guide because that's the one that I like the most. Anyway, so this is number 4, and the last one that I'm going to mention, I'm actually going to play myself, and we're going to be doing it on stream from tonight. But anyway, let's get into the last build. Okay, so the last build on this list, and I'll just move my ugly mug to the other side of the screen, is a Frostblade Raider. In particular, I thought it'd be interesting to play the Raider as heavy armor with iron reflexes. This one I scaled down to level 94, but we can probably rip out another 4 points and take it down. Oh, there we go. Bam. We just have less life. We have level 90. Probably want to have that in there. But we'll figure that out when I test the build and get it working over the next few nights. 94 is not hard to achieve anyway within 7 days. Usually I can get to like 95 within 4 to 5 days of just hardcore playing every single night. That being said, Frostblade's really interesting build. You can play this on the Trickster as well. You just need to change some of these opening nodes to go back up through the Trickster node. So if you want to play the Trickster, you could play it with this as well. I just thought it'd be something really cool for something interesting to play in SSF. That being said, basically, you know, we're looking at, and ignore the unreserved life. The reason why that kicks in is because of stupid arrogance here, and it tries to reserve grace because I don't know how we can break these up at this stage without adding in separate items. So it does spit out an error, but you wouldn't have grace linked. You'd have precision with arrogance and then steel skin set to your move button. So that's pretty straightforward stuff there. And in this in particular, we probably get rid of steel skin and run molten shell just for the lols. Also because then I get to like 78,000 armor, and this is something that we were playing with the Ancestral Protector builds that I was playing around with like a week or two ago. Basically, evasion is the best way to scale armor, stupidly enough. And so we get to 90% physical damage reduction, 100% spell suppression, max cap res except for chaos reses, and that's just going to come down to rings. And then, because it's a Raider, we also get, you know, phasing as well. So with Quartz Infusion, we also get Frenzy Charge stacking and also Frenzy Charge gain because the Raider's really good at that. So you get a lot of Frenzy Charge, so you're super fast. In fact, you get to like 12.07 APS with Frostblades on melee hit. And so we do like 832,000 per blade. And on melee hit 1 million, and that's pretty damn good. That's not an unrespectable amount of speed and a ton of movement speed. And because it's so tanky, and we do a lot of life on hit and a lot of leech, pretty much it's hard to die, or it will be hard to die. That being said, gearing wise, pretty easy stuff. Literally just Imperial Claws. You get life gain on hit, and then you just scale for like elemental damage, lightning and cold damage in this case, and attack speed. Uses a Rat's Nest, which whether or not it drops commonly doesn't really matter. You can still get plenty other gear. This doesn't take away too much DPS. Uses Kintsugi, but you can pretty much change out Kintsugi for pretty much anything with high evasion base on it, and that's going to scale up even more armor. Same with the gloves. Now, non-Val strike skills, that might be a little hard to get in SSF, but not impractical. Dark Ray Vectors, they're pretty common. They may or may not drop, but whether or not they drop isn't going to change whether or not I play the build, because there's plenty of other items that we could use to scale this up. Everything else is pretty damn achievable, from the rings through to the belt, through to the flasks. Literally, it has like 2 life flasks in here, which are completely useless, and I can do this way better. And then a couple of jewels that literally just add damage with claw attacks. Whether you consider that rare or not, they're pretty achievable. Anyway, this is a build that I'm going to play. I'm going to start testing a run through from tonight's stream when I get back from the gym. And yeah, this is build number 5 that I'm going to feature. So I'll put the POB and the POE.BB in the description below for this one as well, because I've been playing around with this. And yeah, it's an Iron Reflexes Raider, which I thought was really cool. So yeah. Okay, so I hope this list gives you a bit of an idea of what to play. I know it's usually a hard decision. You look at all the different builds that you could play. The other thing I'd say is if there's something that you haven't tried that you want to try that might be really cool, give it a crack, see how it goes. I haven't done like leveling guides or anything like this. This isn't league start, so it's just a bit of fun for a bit of a short league. But this video is strictly just to provide a bit of, okay, you could play this, or you could play this, or you could play this. By all means, do a little more research. There's plenty of creators out there putting out videos, and hopefully there's someone else who's putting out more items on a different list that are a little bit different to this one. Anyway, if you like the video, don't forget to like and sub. Don't forget to follow the Twitch. And until next time, I'll see you guys probably on stream and all day Saturday. But have a good one.